All right, welcome to Human Anatomy and Physiology. We're doing our first online lecture, probably our only online lecture. I'm sorry if you don't enjoy it, but it should be shorter and convenient for you guys. You guys don't have to come into class for this. So today we are going to discuss first the digestive system, and then we're going to talk just a little bit about blood typing. So here we go. Digestive system. Okay. We're going to discuss several organs that create what's called the digestive tract. Basically, this goes from your mouth to your anus, and that's kind of the path that food takes and is digested in. There's also organs like your liver or gallbladder or pancreas that are assisting the digestive tract in their functions. Another name for your digestive tract is the alimentary canal, also gastrointestinal tract or GI tract. So if you've ever been to or heard of a GI clinic, they're referring to a gastrointestinal tract clinic. Okay, and again, this starts in your mouth and goes down your throat, which is called your pharynx, then down past the opening to your trachea into your esophagus, where your food finally enters your stomach, your small intestine, and then into the large intestine, and finally the rectum and anus. Okay. The accessory organs that aid in digestion that we're going to talk about, we'll discuss really briefly the tongue and salivary glands and teeth. Your appendix, which the full name of your appendix is called the vermiform appendix. Your peritoneum. Remember one of the first days we talked about the serous membrane that covers your digestive organs. That's the peritoneum. Your liver, which is the largest organ inside your body, your gallbladder, and your pancreas. So, just to kind of give you guys a picture of what your digestive tract is, basically you're one big donut, okay? You can think of yourself as a donut, and at the top of the donut is your mouth, and at the bottom of the donut is your bum, your anus, okay? When you put something in your mouth and swallow it, we like to think that that food is going inside our body, but technically it's still outside your body, okay? It's going to run the length from your mouth to your anus, and the entire time that food stays outside your body. Okay, so you have 4 layers of the wall of your gastrointestinal tract. Okay, the innermost layer is the inner mucosa, and this is going to be that mucous membrane that we've talked about before that lines your digestive tract. It's protecting the epithelial cells of your, whether it's the stomach, the esophagus, large intestine. Then you have the submucosa. This is kind of a connective tissue layer that has lots of blood vessels, glands that are going to secrete into the lumen. You'll have nerves in the submucosa. The outer layer is actually divided into 2 layers, but for our purposes, just know the one layer, the muscularis. This is the muscular layer that's going to allow movements that we'll discuss, like segmentation and peristalsis, basically that churn your food and move it along as your body digests it. Finally, you have the serosa, And what the serosa is, it's the outermost layer, and it's basically that visceral layer of the peritoneum. And remember, visceral layers are attached to the organs. Okay, let's talk about your your mouth. Your mouth is also called the oral cavity. And there's a few words that we're going to throw out here. Remember, everything has a new name essentially. So your lips are called labia. You'll hear labia discussed in other body systems too, because people think other body parts look like lips. So lips or labia, you have your gums or your gingivae. You have a palate. Remember, your palatine bones and maxillary bones make up the hard palate. And then there is a muscular portion posterior to the hard palate called the soft palate. But the palate is essentially the roof of your oral cavity. You also have your tongue, a very muscular organ that helps to direct food in your body, in your mouth as you chew, and also allows for the sense of taste. You have salivary glands, okay, that help to secrete enzymes that both digest the food and moisten the food so that it travels down your alimentary canal smoothly. And finally, you have your teeth. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the lips or labia. It is the first sphincter of your digestive system. We're going to talk about 7 sphincters, and it'll be something you'll want to know for your quiz and your exam. Is the 7 sphincters of the digestive tract. The orbicularis oris muscle is the first of these sphincters. Okay, your lips are going to help you keep food inside your oral cavity, and also when you're communicating, it's going to help you to form certain sounds. Okay, your hard palate is formed by 4 bones, 2 maxillae and 2 palatine bones. We've discussed this, and you can see that your palate extends into a soft palate. And again, this is essentially arch-shaped muscles. This is going to help forming sounds also, as well as keeping food from traveling from your oral cavity up into your nasal cavity and vice versa. The very most posterior portion of your soft palate is that dangly thing in the back of your mouth. It's called uvula. And the soft palate's also going to separate your nasopharynx from your oropharynx. And we're going to talk about the pharynx in just a minute. Okay, your tongue forms the base of your oral cavity. You have what's called the lingual frenulum. Okay, this extension here, this kind of membrane at the base of your tongue that holds your tongue to the floor of your oral cavity. Know that landmark. You're going to have 3 pairs of salivary glands in your mouth. Okay? These salivary glands secrete saliva and digestive enzymes that we're going to talk about near the end of this lecture. The 3 pairs are the parotid, submandibular, and sublingual. Okay, and most of these names are going to be able to clue you into where they're located. So I would memorize the names first and then be able to recognize them from a picture. Your parotid gland is actually located between the masseter and the skin of your cheek, so that as you chew, basically that masseter muscle is pressing that parotid gland and pushing saliva out into your mouth. You have submandibular glands that open up onto either side of that lingual frenulum. Okay, so here's a picture of that lingual frenulum. So your submandibular glands are going to release saliva just right on either side of that lingual frenulum. And you can actually see these if you look in the mirror. There's very small openings that you can see lining the lower border of your tongue. You also have sublingual glands. Lingual is tongue. Okay, so that's why when you see lingual frenulum, it's the frenulum of your tongue. Sublingual gland is beneath the tongue. Glands beneath the tongue. Okay, so sublingual and submandibular glands are essentially in the same area. Submandibular glands are just a little bit farther back. So I'll correct myself here. The sublingual glands are actually the ones that you see immediately to either side of the lingual frenulum, and the ones that you'd be able to see in the mirror most likely. Okay, your teeth. If we're going to do the anatomy of a tooth, which I did ask on last semester's final exam. So you have the crown, which is the portion that you see above the gum or gingivae, the neck, which is this narrowed portion of the tooth. So you can see that the crown is flared and it narrows as it comes into the mandible. Okay, so if this bone is the mandible, the neck is where it enters the bony portion of the mandible. And finally, you have the roots. Okay, you can see that these teeth are very vascular structures, and also they're each going to have their own nerve. Know how many teeth you have and how many of each kind. So you have 8 incisors. So these are the front 4 teeth on the upper and lower portions of your mouth. So your upper set is going to have 4 incisors on the front, and your lower set is going to have 4 incisors on the front. You have 4 canines. These are the sharp pointy ones, just after the incisors. Behind the incisors you'll have premolars, 2 on each side, upper and lower. Okay, sometimes these are called bicuspids because they have 2 points to them. Behind the premolars you'll have molars. These are the bigger ones used for grinding and chewing. And behind the molars you have wisdom teeth, which are technically molars, but we'll call them wisdom teeth. And usually these are removed because they kind of crowd out your other teeth as you get older. All right, your pharynx is basically what you think of when you hear the word throat. Okay, so your throat is your pharynx, and it's divided into 3 parts based on which cavity it is behind. So your nasopharynx is just behind your nasal cavity, so you can see here, you see your nasal turbinates, you have your nasopharynx. Behind your tongue and oral cavity you have your oropharynx here in yellow, and finally the most inferior portion is called the laryngopharynx. In this this picture it's called the hypopharynx, but for the purpose of this class, no laryngopharynx. Okay. So in one of the group presentations, one of your classmates discussed what a bolus is, and basically a bolus is a collection of chewed food mixed with saliva, and a bolus will travel from your oropharynx into your laryngopharynx and finally into your esophagus as you swallow it. Let's talk about your esophagus. Okay. The esophagus is a muscular tube that participates in segmentation and peristalsis, which we'll discuss later. Interesting thing about the esophagus is usually it's closed, okay? So it's kind of a potential tube. So it's flat against each side is touching the other, and it's only open as you swallow a bolus, and then that travels down the length of the esophagus. There's a structure called the esophageal hiatus, okay, which is basically the level of your diaphragm. The hiatus is an opening, so the esophageal hiatus is the opening in the diaphragm through which the esophagus passes on its way down into the abdomen. And this is going to be just before the bolus enters the stomach, is where you would find the esophageal hiatus. Okay, so this is the official first segment of the digestive tube, or your alimentary canal. And we've talked about different kinds of muscle, both voluntary and involuntary. Your esophagus is going to have a mix of these two kinds of muscle. So you know that you have some capability to voluntarily swallow things, but there are also involuntary muscles helping to mix food and move it along the length of the esophagus. Okay, let's talk about the next two sphincters of your digestive tract. Number one was the orbicularis oris. Number two is the upper esophageal sphincter, which is going to be right at the top near the laryngopharynx. Basically, this sphincter can close off the esophagus and prevent air from entering it when you're breathing in and out. Everyone knows that it's not super fun to have a lot of air in your digestive tract. So this is one of the purposes of the upper esophageal sphincter. The lower esophageal sphincter is also called the cardiac sphincter because of its proximity to the heart. And that's going to help prevent gastroesophageal reflux, or when your stomach churns, it's going to push stomach acids and other stomach contents up, and your lower esophageal sphincter is basically supposed to prevent those acidic substances from entering your esophagus. Let's talk about something called a hiatal hernia. Okay, a hiatal hernia is a fairly common abnormality that occurs, and so if you look here, you have your esophagus that comes down and enters into your stomach. Before it enters into the stomach, it passes through that esophageal hiatus in the diaphragm. Okay, and so this is what it should normally look like. However, there are times where the stomach can herniate or push up through the diaphragm. So it's called a hiatal hernia because the stomach has herniated up through that esophageal hiatus. Okay, so here's your diaphragm, and a portion of your stomach is up in your thorax, between your lungs and encroaching on the area where your heart is. These can be very serious, so it could be just a portion of the stomach that's up through, or it could actually be the entire stomach and parts of the intestine that push up through the diaphragm and sit in your thorax, which, as you can imagine, would make it difficult to do things like breathing and swallowing and digesting in general. So it can be from a very unconcerned malfunction to a really serious one. Okay, let's talk about the stomach. Again, you have the esophagus entering in the area called the cardia. So this region just where the esophagus enters is called the cardia. Up above, you see kind of a rounded dome. Looks like a little hill at the top of the stomach. This is called a fundus, and again, fundus is something you'll hear in discussing the female uterus. Fundus is basically just a domed roof. The body is this yellow portion, basically the body of your stomach. And finally, just before entering the small intestine, you have a region called the pylorus. You have two sphincters associated with the stomach. The first we've already discussed, the lower esophageal sphincter, which controls flow into the stomach and prevents flow back into the esophagus. And the second one is the pyloric sphincter. Okay, this is regulating movement of gastric contents from the stomach to the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. So basically, gastric juices squirt through this pyloric sphincter into the duodenum. When you hear the term gastric, you should think stomach. Everything gastric is associated with the stomach. Inside the stomach, this is the inner layer of the stomach, and you see these deep ridges or folds in that inner mucosal layer. Those folds are called gastric rugae, okay? And this is going to increase the surface area inside the stomach to improve digestion, and it's also going to help break up foods as your stomach churns. There's 4 kinds of cells that secrete enzymes and different things into the lumen of your stomach, okay? The first is a mucous neck cell, and basically that secretes mucus, as you would assume. The second, you have a chief cell. This is going to secrete some digestive enzymes that we're not going to get into too much. Parietal cells are the cells that secrete hydrochloric acid, or HCl. Okay, hydrochloric acid is very acidic and helps in the digestion of mainly proteins. You also have a couple of endocrine cells, and these endocrine cells secrete 2 different hormones. I want you to know what these hormones do and what they're responsible for. First, you have ghrelin, which is going to basically create the sensation of hunger. Second, you have gastrin, okay? And gastrin is going to help in the digestive process inside your stomach. So what does the stomach do? Okay, you know it helps in digestion. Okay, it's secreting that hydrochloric acid and those other enzymes that are helping in that process. We talked about how it churns food, breaks it into smaller particles, and mixes with the different enzymes that are present. There's going to be a lot of vitamin absorption in the stomach and the absorption of other nutrients. And because of the acidic environment in the stomach, there's not very many bacteria that can live in that environment. So it's going to destroy lots of these bacterial things that enter through your mouth, and it's going to prevent them from traveling through the rest of your GI tract. Also, it obviously holds quite a lot of food. Okay, so after the stomach, we're going to get into the small intestine. Your small intestine is about 1 inch wide, so the lumen is about 1 inch wide, and about 20 feet long. So this is a really long hose all wound up inside your abdomen. Basically, your small intestine fills up most of your abdominal cavity. Okay? And there's 3 portions of the small intestine that are not very easily identified just from looking at the outside of the small intestine, but they have different absorption purposes and digestive purposes. So the first part is the duodenum. Okay, duodenum means 12 finger widths. Okay, so or that comes out to about 10 inches long. So the first section of your small intestine is called the duodenum, and it's only about 10 inches long. The jejunum is 8 feet long. Okay. A approximately 8 feet long, depending on the person. The ileum is about 12 feet long. So first duodenum, second is jejunum, and the last portion is the longest, and that is called the ileum. Okay, after the small intestine, we get into the colon or the large intestine. Okay, colon and large intestine are pretty much interchangeable, and it has a larger diameter, but it is much, much shorter than the small intestine, and actually less digestion takes place in the large intestine, and more absorption occurs. Okay, so digested matter enters the large intestine from the small intestine right here in what's called the cecum. Okay, so this is going to enter this region, and the cecum is just kind of a large pouch at the start of the small intestine, and food matter is going to travel up. This is called the ascending colon because it's moving upward. And then you have this flexure or curve here, and then it's going to move across this transverse colon section where it reaches this flexure and then moves down through the descending colon and around the sigmoid colon. Sigmoid means S-shaped or curved, so this curved portion is the sigmoid. And then finally it's going to enter the rectum, okay, which is this vertical portion just before the anus. And finally you're going to have your anus, which obviously expels fecal matter. In your large intestine, you're going to have an ileocecal valve. If you remember, the ileum is the last portion of the small intestine. Cecum is the first part of the large intestine. So this ileocecal valve is going to control the flow from the ileum of the small intestine to the cecum of the large intestine. And then you have two anal sphincters, okay, just right after the rectum and before the poop comes out. You have the internal anal sphincter and the external anal sphincter. So you know that you have partial control of when you defecate or poop or go to the bathroom. And that's because one of your sphincters is controlled by you and one of them is not. Okay, so the internal sphincter is the one that you do not control. Okay, that is called the involuntary sphincter, and your external sphincter is a ring of muscle that is under voluntary control. You can consciously constrict and relax. As people age, often you lose that voluntary control of the external sphincter, and that causes lots of dependence issues, okay, which can be really frustrating for the aging